This piece is called Celestial Currents, and this is a purely studio piece. It was loosely based on a plein air painting, a painting I did on location, which is like 12 by 16 inches, I'd say maybe 10 years ago. And that was a really favorite painting of mine, and so I decided to do a larger version of it, including a kind of a different type of sky than I originally painted. A few different things inspired the piece. The physical reference was the Lewis River in, I think this was like Woodland, Washington, where I painted the original study. And I've been painting clouds, these backlit clouds, the last few months. I don't know why. I've particularly been drawn to the subject. And so I decided to reinterpret this whole scene in kind of a darker foreground where everything's in shadow, and making these darks really contrast with how the backlit and kind of silver liney the clouds were. And you know, oftentimes I'll look at a painting in retrospect and think about what it means to me, because I don't often premeditate, especially like my studies when I paint on location, and sometimes even in the studio. Won't premeditate, you know, a concept or a design. I'll kind of go off of maybe a little gut feeling or a thought that I'll try to develop. And then almost like in analysis mode, I'll go back and think like, well, where were you emotionally? How were you feeling? Or what does this conjure up, this meaning or this feeling when you look at your own work? I think to me, I've always been drawn to the sky and clouds, like most kids. It kind of reminds me of childhood and daydreaming. But some of my early memories of these types of clouds were flying in immigration. I was on a plane and I'd sit by the window and just look out at these huge cloudscapes, and they just fascinated me because they just looked, you know, like solid forms. And it was a very mesmerizing but also terrifying experience, because it didn't feel like you were flying. You know, sometimes like the whole scene just kind of stood still and you felt like you were floating. Later, I discovered as a kid, when I lie in the grass on my back and just kind of look at the cloudscapes, I can get that feeling of being suspended in the air. And it's, again, kind of almost like a bit of a terrifying feeling, but it's that strong connection to my past, or a past memory of childhood, that I really like. Colors, I don't particularly choose colors. I'll sometimes struggle with that and trying to keep everything contained, because again, like being self-taught, I didn't stick to a certain color palette. I had to figure out a lot of that out of myself, and I tend to paint with a very wide range of colors on my palette, both in the studio and out in the field, maybe up to like 22 different colors. And the reason why I like to do that is because I tend to paint quickly. I like the speed and the immediacy of painting gesturally, and so I don't like slowing down to mix colors. I'd rather have as many shortcuts as possible and let the paints kind of mix on the canvas. So if you look up close, I'll even paint this way in the studio. I'll try to paint gesturally, try to paint fast, and have these decisions kind of be made in the moment as opposed to premeditated or planned out on the palette. And as for brushwork, it took time to develop. I definitely tend to paint thick using lots of paint in my process. I don't know why I gravitated towards that, other than that I really liked seeing thicker paint in other artists' work. You know, when I was younger, I'd see a painting in a museum that was like, you know, done by an artist that's dead for hundreds of years or so, and I would think like, oh my goodness, I could see this individual stroke and like the impression that the bristles made on the paint. And to me, it felt like it was a fossil, like an artifact. Like that was one of the last strokes that the artist put on canvas. You could imagine the amount of pressure it took, or like how poorly mixed the paint was because it kind of marbled on the canvas. To me, I feel like as a viewer, that's very connecting to the artist. It's like this tangible way that I feel like I can connect to the maker, because it adds this form of transparency. Not transparency in the sense of like opacity, but transparency in form of vulnerability. Like I could see some of the process that the artist allowed me to see, as opposed to something really glossy and mysterious. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it's a form of vulnerability. I don't really hide anything. There aren't any really magic tricks in my work. You can get up close and see exactly how the paint was laid down. That's a question I get asked often, and I don't really have like a mileage or timer on each painting, because my process is that since I paint fairly quickly, I will usually paint up to up to half a dozen paintings or canvases throughout a day. If I'm in the studio, so I'll take something off the drying rack, paint on it for like 45 minutes, get it to a place where I can't figure something out, or I'm stuck, or it maybe feels and looks good, and then just bring another painting. And so within that process, a painting from start to finish may take, I don't know, several months, but it's because I have like a whole dozen of paintings on the drying racks that I'm also working on. I think it's because I like the original study a lot. I like this bank of trees. I also painted it with a really good friend of mine, and also Ukrainian artist. We had a really just wonderful day. I have the same kind of version of, or similar version of this scene in the painting that he did, and he ended up gifting me that painting many years ago. And I'm honestly kind of surprised I haven't painted the scene sooner. Maybe it was just because it felt that special to me. It was kind of like sacred. I didn't want to not be able to do it justice.